It's hard to put this into words, this long and painful journey that I've been through. I don't think I'll ever be able to truly sum it up in a way that does it justice, but I'll give it a shot. From 2020 to 2023, everything that I thought was stable in my life fell apart. It's as though the universe decided to take everything from me in waves, leaving me with nothing but the wreckage of my own existence. Each loss was like a knife to my chest, and it felt like I couldn't catch my breath before the next tragedy hit. The first blow came in 2020, when I lost my mother. She was the heart of our family, the glue that kept everything together. It wasn't just her passing that left a hole in my life, it was the fact that she had been my rock, my constant source of love and support. I didn't know how to live without her, and to this day, I still feel like part of me went with her. Losing her was a blow I never saw coming, even though we knew her health had been declining. It still didn't prepare me for the emptiness that followed. There's no way to explain what it feels like to lose someone like that, someone who was everything to you. But life wasn't done throwing punches. Soon after, I had to face the death of my 19-year-old godson. He was just a kid, full of promise, with his whole life ahead of him. And just like that, he was gone. That's the kind of loss that doesn't make sense. It's the kind that makes you question the very fabric of life itself. I loved him like he was my own, and losing him took something from me that I still haven't been able to get back. I tried to breathe through it, but it felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. Every time I thought I was starting to heal, something else would happen, and I'd be knocked back down. Then came the loss of my 3 dogs. Each of them had been a source of comfort and companionship through the darkest moments of my life. They had been with me when I had no one else, their loyalty unwavering. To lose them one by one was like losing a part of myself each time. I can't even explain what they meant to me. They weren't just pets, they were family. They loved me without judgment, without condition, and losing them was yet another heartache I couldn't avoid. But the worst, the absolute worst, was yet to come. My best friend's son, a boy I had known since he was a baby, a boy I had watched grow up, took his own life. His suicide left a hole in my heart that's still there. I didn't know how to process it. How do you handle something like that? He was so full of life, so full of potential, and yet he felt so alone that he felt his only option was to end it. That kind of pain, it doesn't have a resolution. It leaves you feeling empty, like a part of the world has just stopped making sense. In the midst of all this grief, when I thought I couldn't take another loss, my 34-year-old son became gravely ill. His illness hit us out of nowhere, and suddenly we were thrust into a battle for his life. The doctors told us it was a race against time, that he needed a transplant, and there was no guarantee it would work. It was like everything else had led me to this moment, this one point where I had to choose, my son, or everything else. And no matter what, my son was my priority. But it wasn't easy, not by a long shot. At first, my husband, my partner, stood by me. He said he'd support me through it all, that he'd help me shoulder the burden. But as the days wore on, and the situation became more desperate, cracks began to form in our relationship. The stress, the strain, it became too much for him to handle. I'll never forget the day I told him that I was bringing my son home to die. I thought I was making the hardest decision of my life. But instead of standing by me, instead of supporting me, he became angry. He told me he couldn't bear it, that he wasn't strong enough to handle it. I remember staring at him, feeling something inside me break, like the last thread of trust snapping. I told him, through my tears, that if my son couldn't come home to die in peace, then he could leave. My son's needs were my only focus, and if he couldn't understand that, then there was no place for him in my life. My husband left. He walked out, and even though I was devastated by it, I didn't regret my decision. For once, I chose someone else, and I chose my son. I would never apologize for that. I poured every ounce of energy I had into fighting for my son's life. I did everything in my power to get him the transplant he needed, pushing myself beyond exhaustion. I spent sleepless nights on the phone with doctors, with specialists, with anyone who could help. And somehow, against all odds 2 days before it would have been too late, we got him the transplant. It saved his life. But it came at a cost. His recovery was going to take a year, and during that time, the cracks in my marriage widened even further. My husband, who had already been distant, began an affair. It didn't come as a surprise to me, not really. I had always known there were issues in our marriage, but it wasn't until 8 months later that I found undeniable proof. I discovered it in the most mundane way: his car. The evidence was there, hidden in plain sight. For 2 days I kept quiet, but in those 2 days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. When I finally confronted him, I remained calm. He denied everything, of course. He told me I was just trying to ruin our marriage, that I didn't trust him. And that was the breaking point for me. The pain of hearing him lie to my face, of knowing he had been betraying me, was worse than any other loss I had experienced. The argument that followed was one of the worst we'd ever had. I was so broken, so done with everything, that I told him to pack his things and leave. If he couldn't work on things with me, then I couldn't do this anymore. I thought about it afterward, and part of me regretted it. But by then, he was already gone, and I had already convinced myself that he was innocent, that I had been wrong to doubt him. But it wasn't the end of the story, not by a long shot. In the months that followed, as I focused on my son's recovery, my husband continued to tell me that he was sick, living with roommates in some rundown place. He wouldn't let me help him, though. I tried to reach out, to offer him assistance, but he refused it. Instead, he'd come by to fix things around the house, and I'd cook meals for him. I gave him money, even though it felt so wrong, because we had always kept our finances separate. But despite everything, I still cared about him. I still loved him. I couldn't help it. During this time apart, I worked on myself. I started going back to church, found new interests, and began to heal. We'd text occasionally, and we'd see each other when it was necessary to work on the house. But it wasn't romantic. It was just two people, trying to figure out how to exist in the same space. Slowly, though, we began to build a tentative friendship again. In September, I made an offer. I suggested that we could work on our marriage, that he could move back in. But instead of taking that offer, he became angry. He told me he could never come back, that I had kicked him out, and that I had betrayed him. 13 years of marriage, and this was how he saw it. I was crushed, and yet he continued to confuse me. He would offer to help with things, but he had walked away from everything: the bills, the repairs, the responsibilities. And now he was broke, without a place to live. I still loved his family, even though they had turned their backs on me the moment he left. They didn't want to hear the truth, and I had to accept that. He had promised them he wouldn't let it happen, but he had lied. I was the one left to pick up the pieces of my life, alone. And that was the part that hurt the most. Then, just last week, everything changed. A mutual friend reached out to me, and the truth finally came to light. My husband had been living with a woman named Marna, and they were into swinging. The worst part? Everyone at his work knew about it, but I had been kept in the dark. I felt humiliated. I had been living a lie, believing he was sick and alone, while he was living a life that I never could have imagined. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I did a background check on Marna. What I found shook me to my core. She had a criminal record, and she was bankrupt. I wasted no time confronting my husband. I told him I knew everything now, and I demanded a divorce. I wasn't going to stay in a marriage built on lies. He was furious. He blocked me from texting him, and when I sent him a long email, it wasn't full of rage or bitterness. I simply called him out for everything: his betrayal, his lies, and told him I was done. I included links for a no-contest divorce and made it clear this was the end. Now, he's ghosting me. But honestly, I'm too heartbroken to care anymore. I'm still trying to process the fact that, after everything I did for him, he could betray me in such a cruel way. Then, just this morning, I did something that made me feel guilty, but also strangely at peace. I reached out to his sister-in-law, the one person in his family who hadn't turned her back on me. We had been friends before he moved out, and even though she distanced herself after everything happened, she still acknowledged me. I had to tell her the truth, about his affair, his swinging lifestyle, the lies he told. I had proof, and I felt like she needed to know who he really was. I feel guilty for doing this. I've always valued my integrity, my faith, and my sense of self. But I also feel like his family needed to know what he had become. I don't know if it was the right decision, but it feels like the only way for me to find peace. We don't have kids, and I've asked for a divorce 3 times now. He's never responded. I don't know how to move forward. He's betrayed me over and over again, and the pain is worse now than it ever was. I didn't snoop, I didn't spy, but last week, the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. I had believed in him, loved him, even when my son was fighting for his life. But all the while, he was cheating. I was a fool to trust him. I'm heartbroken. Part of me feels justified in exposing his secrets, telling his family who he really is. But another part of me feels like I've lost something important, my integrity. It's hard to go to work every day, knowing people pity me while he's out there, living his life publicly. I wasn't trying to be a gossip, but now I wonder if I should have just gone through a lawyer and moved on quietly. Right now, all I feel is sadness.